for you. Assalamu alaikum, Naila.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
And today we'll be having two amazing guests, just like last week, Sister Shamim and Zainab. Naila's decided to call this the tale of two sisters because, yes, Zainab and Shamim are both sisters. Let's start with the dua first. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Assalamu alaikum, Naila. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How's your Ramadan been going?
Alhamdulillah, it's been going really, really well.
Alhamdulillah. And the kids are at home.
They're good, mashallah. It's the Easter holiday, so I'm hoping that people are listening to our show. So, just to remind you again, you are listening to Radio Ramadan on 87.7 FM. Our text number is 07748 855 055. I'm sure you know the number. You can listen online on www.ramadan.fm. You can also download on the Android app or on your smartphone. You can also listen to us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. There are several other platforms as well I could go on, but I won't, inshallah. And I just want to welcome our guest in the studio today in the show. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Shamim.
Wa alaikum salam.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, doing really well.
Good. So let me just give you a little bit of a background to what our show is going to be about today. So listeners, we're going to be talking about managing change. That has been our theme for all the 4 shows that we're doing. And today what we're going to be talking about is the role of women. Now, often when you think about that, you sometimes think, okay, I don't like change, but perhaps the most significant amount of change that happens for women is the changing roles that they have during their lives. So you come into the world, you're a daughter, and then at some point you become a student, and then you become potentially a wife, a mother-in-law, sisters, sister-in-laws, mother-in-law, and then grandparents. So there's a lot of change that goes on in your life. So please text in your views, your points, or if anything you want to say in relation to our comments or our discussion. And our on the line guest will be Zainab, who will be calling in a few moments, inshallah, and she'll be sharing her stories. So let's start off with a few hadith. So often when we think about women, I think perhaps maybe the biggest concept that comes across is that, Islam is a religion that is kind of quite patriarchal and quite misogynistic and treats women in a negative way. But actually, in the time of ignorance when Islam came, the way that which women were treated was much, much harsher. So, I'm sure you're familiar with the story and the history in which women, if they had children, if they were female children, they were buried alive. So female infanticide was quite the norm. Women were not treated with any equality. They didn't have any titles. They didn't have any kind of authority in society, as in many cultures and societies. So the Prophet ﷺ came to this world, and what he was trying to achieve in his message was to elevate the position of women. And Islam was the first religion to actually tackle these traditional stereotypes about women. So, for example, so your Lord responded to them, I will never deny any of you, male or female, the reward of your deeds. Both are equal in reward. And that's in Al-Imran on Surah 3, verse 195. I enjoin upon you to treat women kindly, and that's in Bukhari. There's several, I could go on. A believer must not hate a believing woman, i.e. his wife. If he dislikes one of her traits, he will be pleased with another, and that's in Muslim. If anyone has a female baby and does not bury her alive or slight her or prefer his male children to her, Allah will bring him into paradise. And again, that's in Ahmed.
I think some of the significant changes that Islam made were, like you said, infanticide. It got rid of that. And then the fact that women were able to now inherit, the fact that there was a limit in terms of marriage of women. So these were things that were really significant in the community at the time.
Also elevating their positions about getting an education.
Yes.
Which brings us on to our guest. So Shamim, what I'd like to ask you, if I can, is tell me a little bit about yourself.
Born and bred in Leicester. Grew up in Highfields in the 80s. I was the oldest of 5 children, and both my parents were working. Mum was doing work in the house and supporting my dad and raising us 5 as well. I went to Moat Community College, quite a popular inner city secondary school, which had its own challenges.
Okay, so let me just backtrack a story. So where are you in the 5 sisters?
I'm the oldest of all 5. And then
is there more pressure then because you're an older sister that, you know, you're going to be trailblazing, and what you choose to do or don't do then has an impact on your siblings?
Oh, definitely. And I think as I grew up, I'd always felt like the more responsible one, which I think is normal when you're the oldest. You know, you do babysit a lot more, and you do have to tell the others off. You do get made responsible. But I became very aware, particularly when I went to college, just how much pressure I felt. I don't think anyone put it on me either. I think it was just something that I'd sort of understood, that whatever I did, right or wrong, was going to make a difference to how my sisters, what kind of chances my sisters got. So particularly when I went to university, there was a lot of pressure back then. I think in the 90s and the early 2000s, any woman who did go to university, especially if you were Asian and Muslim, you knew what the stereotypes were of you, that, you know, you were going to do something, have a fling with a guy, or you were going to do a runner somewhere, or I think some of the fears as well, that you were going to be so broad-minded that you wouldn't want to get married.
Okay, so let me just backtrack the story a little bit. So when you went to Moat then, okay, what was your experience of school as an experience? So were you one of these studious students and you wanted to go places, or did you find the challenges of being in an inner city school a challenge for you?
I think it was difficult in that environment, but for me, education, it had been drummed into me right from a very small age that education was the only way forward. Both my parents said that, and I felt the pressure a bit more because my mum had wanted to be a doctor, but wasn't able to. Like a lot of women in her generation, they were just, they were just told to get married. And so my mum said that, you know, the chances she never had, she was going to give us those. And she kind of said to us that the GCSEs were important, college was important. So
you had a lot of support from home. So that's
definitely
quite good then. And for you then, so you were having a lot of support from parents and they were encouraging you. And I think if I could just say that to the audience, one of the things that we know that on statistical data is that, you know, the parents, although people think they're not important, they're hugely important. So, you know, I'm sure Shamim will tell you as a teacher that we have kids who are in our classes, and they, you know, they mess around or they don't do what they're supposed to, or they've got potential to do really well. And you ring home and the parents are like, well, they're not bothered. And so without that support at home, it massively improves or disproves your chances of success. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, definitely. Experiencing it firsthand for a start taught me that, you know, I saw around some of my friends, some of the other people in school. And, you know, when you live in Highfields, you get to see, it was very close-knit back then. And I think that all helped. You could see kind of what was going on, what the attitudes were as well back then amongst the Asian community. But as a teacher for nearly 18 years now, I agree with you. Your experience in the classroom tells you, and your interaction with certain kids tells you that all it needed was a bit more support.
From home.
Just from home.
So just for the parents out there. So, you know, if you've got children that are going through the education system, as a lot of you will have, and you want them to do well, it's really important to have those conversations that you're very supportive of whatever they want to learn. But, you know, and sometimes you may not have the skills, okay, and that's another story. But just to know that, you know, you're pro education, you want them to do well, and finding out a bit more about that could be really helpful. So let me just ask you, Shamim, was there any pressure when you were in the college, going into college before university, about getting married? Because that's a common thing, isn't it?
Well, see, from my parents, no, absolutely not. They just said, we expect you to go to college. And I was going to QE as well, which from Highfields, because we were living in Highfields back then, that was nearly a 3-mile trek. And I was walking on my own with all my friends. And I know a lot of people back then, a lot of their friends and things were really surprised that my parents were letting me. But my dad had come with me to the open days. And when you say, you know, like you say, when parents don't have the skills and that, my dad was educated in India, and due to poverty, he wasn't able to go any further. So he didn't understand the GCSEs, the A-levels or anything, but he came with me, and the vibes he picked up from certain colleges, and he just said to me, you're not going here, pick another one. And I just tell him, I said, you do know the next one's really far. And he said, but it's the best one, so you'll be going there, just work hard. But that, from him and my mum, they were really proud to say, you know what, she's going to college, she's doing her A-levels, and we're going to support that. From extended family, however, I think particularly in India, and people whose daughters hadn't quite reached that age, the mindset there, the discussions and the comments were something different.
So were your parents taking note of what the extended family is? As I know that I was talking to another sister just the other day, and she was saying something similar, that, you know, when she was picking her A-levels, there was a whole family conference, and, you know, about things like that. And I know that when I had my first child, they had a family conference about how big my stomach was after I had the baby. So, you know, I'd be surprised how much a family conference gets involved in every discussion. So do you feel that there's a pressure from that external influence that, you know, you have to follow a certain pathway, because if you do something wrong, you're going to hear it from the extended family?
I think my parents were, I think a lot of my friends always said from the start, my parents were a bit different. And one of the things I did notice about my parents is, to begin with, everyone was bringing their kids up the same. In the 80s, I noticed that in all the families, didn't matter which branch of the community you were in, everyone was trying to do the same thing, because you're like the first wave of Indian immigrants over here. So you stick to your community, you stick to what's comfortable. When it got to education, my parents were very different. They were there with me, and they said that, you know, as long as you don't put the foot wrong, which was the only warning I ever got. Don't do anything to shame us or to shame yourself, and we've got your back. So when they were, you know, when people were saying when I turned 16, oh, it's time to get married, and my mum immediately shot back in a room full of women that no, that won't be happening to her.
Okay.
That those days are gone.
So moving from being, so how did you juggle? Because obviously you're living in Highfields. You're doing A-levels. You've got 5 sisters. How did you juggle study at home?
Oh, sorry, no, I've got 4 siblings, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and then I'm the older one.
Right, okay. 5 siblings.
We lived in a 2-bedroom house. We didn't have a lot. We grew up like, I guess, a lot of 80s and 90s kids did, with very little. But when it came to doing things like coursework and needing facilities and things, I just used to sit on my mum's bed and do all my work there.
I think that's a really good point that you're making there, because sometimes when I'm talking to students and they'll say, well, I don't have a room on my own to just do my own study, so that's why I don't do anything. But if you really want to study, you can find a way. When I was studying, I had a sibling who we shared a bedroom, and so obviously she needed to use the room and she had all her books. So I used to just make a packed lunch, and I used to just go to the library and spend the whole day at the library and then come back, because you make way if you want to do something. It's all about intention. Wouldn't you agree, Anila?
Yes, I do actually, Naila. And you know, you were saying about resources with 80s, 90s kids, and I remember significantly one time when I had this history assignment to do, and we didn't have any glue in the house, and you know, it wasn't one of those things where you had to go to W.H. Smith's to get glue. You know, it wasn't like you could buy it from the corner shop, or we had an Asda or a Sainsbury's or something, you know, where you could buy it from. So I remember my mum saying, oh, well, back home, if you basically watered down the flour, the atta, you can actually use that as glue. And that's what so I tell my children this, and I said, you know, you guys, just before they go back to school, they want to visit W.H. Smith's and pick up what they need to do. I said, you know, this is how we used to, we just made do with what we had. So I do agree with you. It was, but it made us who we are, I think.
Definitely. I think I didn't realize it at the time. I used to see, like, some of my friends at school used to have a computer and were doing everything on Word that had just been launched and things, you know, it's new software and things. And I used to look at everyone else's and think, oh, okay, fair enough. But I only had like a couple of pairs of clothes through school and through college. And you know what? It just made me grateful for every little thing.
Alhamdulillah. And I think that's something that we need to take on board. And if I just give you a small statistic, I said that obviously, you know, when both Shamim and I, who are teachers, are out in the community and we see classes and students don't want to work, do you know what the statistic globally is of girls being educated? No. Does anybody want to have a guess?
25%?
Lower.
20?
Lower.
15?
Lower.
10?
Lower. It's 8. 8% of the population around the world are able to read and write globally for girls. So although we're living in the UK, and I know that lots of people are shocked by that statistic, what that tells us is that we've got a free education here. And for all girls who are out there studying, if we were back home, if we went back 2 generations and our parents didn't come here, what would our experience have been? We take for granted what Allah has given us, all those blessings. And that statistic is quite stark. I mean, we can't go on trips to Pakistan for 6 months or India like we used to, where we can show our family just how the reality is so easily. But that statistic is quite stark. Now, if you don't have a good education, then when you do become a parent, what we do understand statistically is Without a basic education, your health deteriorates much more because you make poorer life choices. Also, extending your family's life and the health and the food and the lifestyle choices that you make can obviously lead to a shorter lifespan. So education is not just about, books and learning and jobs and money. It actually helps with your well-being. It has much more far-reaching factors. So education can actually elevate you as a person. So statistically, if we're saying globally, only 8% of girls are getting an education. Think about all the careers that you could potentially go into. And often, we're encouraged in many ways to kind of reduce it down. You can't do this because, you're going to get married. It might intimidate a man, or, somebody's not going to marry you because you've got too much of your own mind, and all of those things that kind of are put on us. But then, if you went to the doctors, you'd want a female doctor, and you'd want a female nurse, and you would want a female practitioner wherever you can. But if we don't raise the aspirations, then how are we going to change that?
Absolutely, Naila. I think that's a really significant point. I'm absolutely astounded that you said 8%.
That's really shocking. But then saying that, I've got a lot of nieces in India, my husband's family and things, and some of my own cousins and things. And I think about my cousins who are similar age to me. And like you say, before you could go to India for a prolonged period of time and you could see everything. But every time I've been, they're all my age, just a couple of years younger or older, but they're all doing exactly what their mums did. And I know the reason why. It was sheer poverty. But now their kids are going to good schools and they're paying for tuition and things. But in our family, what happened was they'd capped them from what our equivalent of the GCSEs were. And that's when I stepped in and said to them last year that, you know what, we need to start changing. And change is scary because my parents let me change, let me pave the way, and that paved the way for my sisters, my cousins and everyone, because suddenly all the uncles and aunts who were doubtful of me going to university were suddenly like, oh, look, she's doing it right. We want our daughters to be the same. This is okay. It's a safe area. So I started telling my cousins and that over there that, you know what, like you said, you want a female gynecologist, or you want a female doctor or a female police officer. Why is it that you're waiting for somebody else's daughter? Why can't yours be those people? Because you educate one, she'll educate 10. And isn't that how it should work? It only takes one, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Malcolm X's saying, isn't it? To educate a woman is to educate
a society. She's the first madrasa. And so the more that you have that knowledge and that skills, and cooking and cleaning have their place, and the Tarbiyah of Islam has its place, but then there's other skills, because as I know that there is a rising level of divorce. I mean, I think Leicester's quite high on the scale of divorce rates in the UK. I think we're number 5. Oh my God. So, and I don't know, there's no specific, I'm not going to go into the gender or an ethnic breakdown, but to say that actually divorce is something that's quite stark. So for girls, if you're going to get married, of course we want them to be successful, and we want them to be married, and we want the family to be together, but that doesn't always happen.
And 99% of the time, God forbid, if they do divorce, the children end up staying with the mother.
So if she's got an education, then she's able to enable and empower. So carrying on, so I want just to ask you, Shamim, tell me a little bit about your experience from moving from being a student then to the next stage. So you've got to university, right? How did that experience go? What were your challenges?
My challenges, first of all, were, I think, as well...
Leaving Leicester.
I didn't leave Leicester, actually. It was really strange. I'd wanted to, and I had all these fancy ideas, but then my parents were a bit reserved actually about letting me go to university, because I think that's a big wide world. They didn't, until that point, no one had been to university in our family, and I'd agreed that, okay, look, I'll stay in Leicester, I'll find a course, I'll work as well, so there's no financial burden on anyone, and I promise I will do exactly what you've sent me there to do. And I got myself a job before I'd even left QE, and I paid myself through university.
That's fantastic. So that was, you didn't have tuition fees at that time, or you did?
Oh, we did, but because my dad was, they had the income assessed support at that time. So whatever was left based on my dad's earnings, were just paid for by the government.
Okay, so you worked through so that's interesting. So you went to university, but you funded it yourself, as in you were able to have a part-time job.
Yes, I used to work every weekend. For the first term, I somehow managed to get 2 contracts. One was temporary, so I was working Monday through to Sunday. just Monday to Friday, 3 hours every day, and then 15 hours on the weekend. But I paid for all my books, all my laptops, my driving lessons to begin with. My poor mum did, right, until I finally passed, and then I took over. But I funded it all, most of it, all of it myself.
And that's really interesting. So you were not relying on the bank of mum and dad, like a lot of parents are often doing for their children. So did that make you more independent?
It did, because I was trying to look after my money. I was trying to budget things. And also what I liked about it as well was I could gift my parents nice clothes for their birthdays, or buy clothes for my sisters, so that when they went to college, they would have more than that I had. That when my brother had his interview at a supermarket, I remember going to, because I used to work for Next, I remember going to the staff shop and buying him a pair of trousers that he kept for years afterwards. And, doing those kind of things and being able to, I used to take my mum to Sainsbury's, because that was the named supermarket at the time. And I had a car then, so I used to take her to Sainsbury's when the day I got paid on the 26th, and tell her, right, Mum, fill the trolley, spoil yourself.
Oh,
I'd fill it up with so much junk for my siblings. And being able to do stuff like that, though, made me realise how independence is actually a little bit financially related as well.
So what's interesting, because a lot of young people say, I want to go off to university and I want to live my own life and I want to do everything, but you were able to do that independence while still living in Leicester. So you were able to go to college, go to university, have a part-time job, support your family, and that in itself is quite a lot enabling, quite empowering. So let's move the story on a little bit. So then after university, what did you decide to do?
I took a year out. I worked as a learning support assistant at Moat, and then realised that I wanted to not do primary teaching, which is what I thought I'd do. I went into secondary. And then during my PGC, I also met someone. We got engaged. And then after I qualified, then we got married as well.
SubhanAllah. And you're a mother, I take it?
Yes, to a soon-to-be 9-year-old next week.
SubhanAllah,
yes.
Alhamdulillah. So let me just ask you about some of the aspects of change. Zainab, are you on the line there?
Yes, I am. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Zainab. I just want to draw you into the conversation as well. So welcome to the show. I'm just going to finish discussing with Zainab about her family setup, and then I'm going to switch to you. I just want to say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So Shamim, just tell me, when you went to the next stage then, so how was the change from being a working person and then adjusting to being a wife and a mother? How did those change manifest for you? Where were your challenges?
To begin with, I became a wife and a teacher, both in one go, within 6 weeks of each other. So that was trying to set up a home, trying to adjust to cooking, which, to be honest with you, despite what everyone says now, I did not have a clue how to cook. My mom told my husband when they were arranging my engagement date that, you do know she doesn't know how to cook, right? I've tried, but she doesn't know how to cook. And he was like, oh no, that's fine. But when you're lumbered and you're on your own,
It's not fine.
don't you? You just think, okay, let's just get on with it. I think trying to cope with understanding what in-laws meant and what being a wife means as well, like taking responsibility in all these different ways, making sure that, because my husband worked really long hours, making sure that dinner was done and the house was clean. And part of me wanted to do it, but trying to juggle that with working as a teacher full-time as well, I'll be honest with you, that was really hard. But then again, I just thought, okay, it's there. I'm just going to get on with it. And over time, it becomes easier, doesn't it? Cooking becomes easier and less stressful. And you understand each other. Yeah. And maturity also makes you a little bit more wiser as to where you can take the shortcuts.
SubhanAllah. And then what about parenting then? So how did your role change again? How did you juggle moving from being a wife and mother? Where was your challenge there?
I think with me, although we hadn't planned it that way, we conceived 10 years after we got married. And in those 10 years, alhamdulillah, we realized this after that we'd secured and worked on our marriage and we'd made it really firm. So we were both ready to become parents. So I think, first of all, that was a major thing, that we both wanted the baby. And it was coming into an environment where there was a lot of love. But when he was born, when I held him the next day in the hospital, I know everyone says your life changes, and I think what everyone means is you can't sleep the way you do. You can't just eat what you want. You have to think of other people, but nobody tells you that
it's no longer about you.
Responsibility that you feel, and I did feel it. I did feel that pressure, and although my sister-in-laws and everyone were like, you know what, you're so good, like you're really calm. And inside I was thinking, really?
You feel like there's a firework
Like,
going on inside,
I
a
feel
bonfire.
like I'm panicking all the time.
Oh, no.
And
Welcome to parenthood.
alhamdulillah for, you know what, that's what Zainab used to say.
Okay, so that, subhanAllah. So, Assalamu alaikum, Zainab. Let me just draw you into the story then. So, tell me a little bit about your journey in terms of your education, and what pathway did you choose to take?
Okay, so I didn't do any kind of orthodox route or anything. When I was 16, and after I left, after I left college, I had secured a really good position at University of Leicester and Dartmouth University. I just had to make up my mind. But one day, I just, I don't know, it was during the holidays, I had a kind of like an epiphany almost. I decided I really didn't want to go down the route of university at that time. I wanted financial independence, and I'd already been working whilst I was at college. So I was working part-time in the evenings and also the weekends. And I just wanted to take a year out to find me, because I had worked incredibly hard. I'd got really good GCSEs, really good A-levels, but I just didn't have my heart in the courses that I'd embarked on. And I just wanted to find myself a little bit.
I think that's a really good point, Zainab, because I think that that's quite a brave decision, because a lot of dirty parents will simply say that we don't take years out. Is that you're just going through, you're going to be roller coastering through the education system so you can get married at the other end.
And also it's a stark difference between you and your sister.
Yes, so my mum did say to me that you're not really going to have any prospects if you're going to be, if you're not going to go to university. And I was like, yeah, thanks for the vote of confidence, Mum. But she did, bless her, like they did support me then in working, and I just wanted to kind of find my roots a little bit before I did go into education again. And I just worked, pretty much saved up all my money. My thing was that I wanted to buy a house. I wanted to just get onto the property ladder. And so when I was 19, my dad did start looking for me. But at the same time, there were marriages happening in the house, Shamim and then my brother. And then obviously the question came up as to when I was going to get married, and I wasn't really looking. But I was still working. I was quite dedicated to my work. And I progressed in my job quite well, alhamdulillah. Like I went from just customer service to work in niche departments, and then obviously my pay grade was quite high for my age, and I'd saved a considerable amount. But then I did get married, and I think I was about 22 when I got married, 22, 23.
So you weren't searching for a husband, you were searching for a house.
Yeah, which I got on, believe it or not. I actually bought the house pretty much independently. There was a bit of support from my dad, and then I bought the house, and I got married. So, yeah.
Okay.
And,
so then what happened in the story? So did you ever go back to university? Or did that just kind of go?
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. So I became a mom, and it was, as Shimam says, motherhood is just something else, isn't it? And I was 24 when I had 25 when I had my firstborn, and it was really scary, especially because I wasn't in a very healthy relationship. And I'd been a bit about me. I came from a really sheltered home. My parents kept me really sheltered. So how clued up, say, Shamim or my older brother are, I don't think I was ever that clued up.
So you're quite naive. About
yes, I was a very soft character, and the person I had married, he wasn't very pleasant, but I just didn't know any better. And for me, I was like, okay, divorce doesn't really happen in our community, just stick it out. And so I did, but at the same time I kept getting drawn back into kind of reading and writing. Have always been my passion, and I thought my child, I think he was about 6-7 months, I was still on maternity leave, and I thought I really need to do something with myself. I don't just want to go back to work for the sake of working anymore. I'd like to kind of fulfill myself. One thing I did find was that motherhood, with all its rewards, it doesn't just fulfill one aspect of a woman. There's so many versions of us, and the best version of us is the one that's happiest with ourselves. That doesn't just come from fulfillment from a marriage or a child or, many children. We're not determined by any of those factors. They just add to our value. We should be happy in our own right. And I decided to go into creative writing. I'd always wanted to be a writer from a young age. I remember like winning competitions at college, being recognized for my work, and I just thought, okay, you know, I want to be a writer. And so I embarked on a creative writing diploma, and that was for 2 years. And my tutor kept pushing me, saying, like, you've got what it takes to get published. You know, you really should try send this piece off for publishing. As it so happened, I fell pregnant with my second, and I was 7 months pregnant when I graduated from my diploma. And I'd studied at University of Leicester, so I'd worked that around working just part-time. So at that time I was working 2 days, and I'd do the diploma in the evenings. But it was actually quite intense because there were so many things that you had to submit. I graduated, and then I took a bit of a breather. But then whilst I was obviously, like, my second born, he was quite clingy, so heading out and about I was limited. And so I just did I did an online diploma in copywriting at that stage. I just wanted to explore the different aspects of writing, and that's where my copywriting career actually kicked off.
So that's really interesting. So you left school at 16, 17 or 18 after doing college, and then you decided, I'm going to go and do something completely different. So I'm not going to follow the traditional university route. And I think for our listeners, that's really empowering for them to see that they're actually within the same family, 2 different pathways from 2 different sisters. Just one is you're chasing your dedication. So you're both interested in English and literature and language, but you've taken 2 very different pathways. Now, obviously, you've got a second child and you started copywriting. Tell us a little bit about what copywriting is for our audience who don't know.
So, copywriting is basically writing words for any aspect of a business. It can be a newsletter, it can be an article, it can be a press release, it can be a script for a radio ad. It can be words for websites. It can be pay-per-click ads. Basically anything that a business would require. And that's the side of me that kind of realized that, okay, I can't, right now I haven't got it in me to make it as a writer because I kept losing motivation. But in terms of copywriting, alhamdulillah, that was a second source of income for me, especially like it really paved my way to independence as well.
Okay, mashallah.
Because obviously I was, so
that's really interesting. Can I just ask another question? So with 2 children then, so how did you juggle all that, the workload of being a wife and mother and 2 children with that? Did you have help from your family?
When it came to my copywriting and writing, obviously my parents, they would look after my children if need be, but the main part of it I did do independently by myself because I can do writing pretty much at any time. And whilst I was absorbed in being a mom during the day, it was pretty much in the evenings when the kids were settled to bed. That's when I do all my projects and my writing and such. And then obviously I was at work 2 to 3 days of the week, whether it be 1 till 6 or 2 till 9. I was quite flexible with my working hours at that time. And in terms of being a wife, I mean, we're going back a while, but that was my first husband, and we kind of, I can't remember much of it. I can't remember any positivity much about that marriage. So we just
you,
sort of.
So you became a single parent then. So you were juggling a lot of things as a single parent. So again, for our listeners, I think again that can show empowerment. That, you know, like sometimes the circumstances in which you find yourself in, that, you know, you can adapt to the change. And it seems to me, Zainab, that you were really adaptive to that situation. That you knew that you needed to do something, and for yourself, but also to your family.
Yeah, so I was in survival mode, and it's not a healthy way to be, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants you strength when you need it, and he paves way when you need it as well. And what happened is that I had my third and inshallah final child, and she was a blessing because I realized then that this is not a healthy way to live. If I do this, if I put up with this now, my child will also grow up like this, and this is just not a route I want for my daughter. So my marriage disintegrated when my baby girl was 18 months, and by then I was a single mom of 3. There was a massive support from all my siblings, and my parents especially. My dad changed a lot of his working pattern basically to help me, but at the same time I was working pretty much, I think I was working 20 to 25 hours, and in an office, but at the same time I was doing my copywriting from home. Whatever came my way, I would literally just accept it. No job was too small.
So,
Even if it was...
sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask a question. I just wanted to ask a question. So in that situation, your parents were very embracing about the fact that you became a single parent, because I think a lot of parents out there that might be listening thinking that that's, you know, something unfortunate has happened for my daughter, but they embraced you back and supported you. And I think that's really empowering again, and very supportive that your parents were, you know, they sound like really amazing people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, make them have a long life, but also that, you know, that they can be trailblazers, and they were able to enable two very different daughters' paths in the situation that they found themselves in, that your father was changing his working hours to help you.
He did, yes, and a lot of adapting was like there on behalf of my sister, because she basically became a second mom to my kids. So whenever I wanted to work a few extra hours, or if I really need time out, even my brother-in-law pitched in, my sister pitched in, my older brother, he'd help with the mosque runs, my younger brother would help with the mosque runs, and my younger sister would just be like available for childcare. So it was really good, but at the same time, I did have a bit of pressure from my parents. Can you please move back into our house so that we can look after you and your children? They felt really uncomfortable with the fact I was a single mom, living by myself in my own home, managing my bills and everything. And this is the important thing, that initially my parents were very reluctant in, say, allowing a divorce. Because there were times, but even before we divorced officially, there were times when they knew that I was struggling with my marriage, and it was like, no, you do need to make it work. Now the mindset shift has happened, because this is really important for anyone who's listening, who is in, say, an oppressive state. We were never born to be oppressed. You know, this community and this society, and even some scholars and imams, they glorify the suffering woman. No. Suffering is not what they make out to be, that you be under someone's thumb and you put up with, say, abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, sexual, whatever it is. It's not allowed. You know, you need to be the best version of you to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And my parents now recognize that.
Alhamdulillah. Because I think a lot of parents don't know, do they, the full story about what's going on, because obviously you're going to shield some of that, aren't they? So they're not going to know the full story. So for anybody that's listening out there, you know, that when we're talking about change, sometimes change doesn't necessarily, you might get to a low point, like we were talking about last week, and we were talking about how Yunus alayhi salam and Ibrahim alayhi salam and all of these situations, even Maryam alayhi salam, they were all in situations where they're going through a real difficult trial, but then Allah elevates and He does ease that situation. So through that difficulty that you had, you then had some ease. Yes.
And I always say that, you know, when you go through any kind of trial, it doesn't mean that there's going to be ease after. You're actually becoming stronger and more resilient for the next trial, so that when you are faced with it, you know, it's actually easier for you to cope.
Yeah, I agree.
And working, it wasn't just working, say, in an office or copywriting. I was still learning through those stages. So the world of copywriting changed massively. It became very much online, and that is not my strong point. I don't like computers and social media so much, but I realized that it was a strong point for business, and so I had to start adapting as well. So I had to then I just put myself on a cheap online course and learned about the digital world. And then whilst I was doing that, I was still doing my own writing projects. I was ghostwriting, so I was writing articles for people who didn't really have a voice. And it was done through various platforms. But then at the same time, alhamdulillah, I did remarry. And by then, obviously, I'd worked on myself and stuff, but I hadn't quite healed from my first marriage, and that's where problems started to hit again. And so I embarked on like a healing journey as well at the same time, because I wanted to fix up for the sake of my children, for the sake of my second marriage, but mainly for me. I just felt like something was amiss in me, like I wasn't whole altogether. There was just too many doubts, too much too many wounds that needed healing within me.
I agree. I think that sometimes when people are going through difficulties, you don't just jump through the hurdle and then think that's it and I'm moving on to the next one. There is a lot of scars. and your battle scars are going to impact on what happens in the future, because what happened in the past is going to impact on the future. What do you think, Shamim?
Of course.
I definitely agree. Like I told you that, we'd through no choice of our own, it had taken 10 years to conceive, but those 10 years were painful. There's a lot of heartache marked in those 10 years, and the scars do remain, because I'd miscarried twice, and both times were incredibly painful, and then being told as well it's not happening naturally. But through all of that, like Zainab says, you have to heal yourself, and that took a really long time, because you're not just healing as a person, you're healing as a wife, you're healing as the mother that you can't be, and you're trying to heal for the child that you've lost, but you're also trying to heal that relationship that's at the core of everything. And I think it was in the 9th year, I think, that we'd kind of accepted that, okay, do you know what? I remember me and my husband saying, this is it, okay, if this is how it's going to be, we're okay with that. If Allah has willed this, then let it be. We can't argue against that. And I think it changed everything, like healing in that way. And we realized then that healing is something that you ask for. You ask for shifa from Allah, don't you? And you ask for the sabr, and you ask for strength. But Allah's given it to you. You just have to find it. And I think as a woman, we are, we have, despite what anyone says, we have such an elevated status in Islam. They say, don't they, that Jannah, paradise, is beneath the feet of a mother. But the strength to take you there also comes from the inner woman herself. So I think we need to realize that women have been created already to do everything.
They toil.
I think sometimes if we doubt ourselves, we're made to doubt ourselves. So just, if you can read into that, then look in yourself. Even for those people that haven't managed to, if you're sitting there now, especially the listeners, if you're sitting there now and thinking, well, I didn't get to go to university, I was one of those people that did have to get married quickly, or I'm happy this way, then there's still chance.
For you.
Life doesn't finish just because
you got married
or
had kids.
Yes.
So what about you, Anila? What's your view?
Well, I think in light of the 8% that you were speaking about, Naila, earlier, your stories are absolutely amazing, how we can overcome that and become the better versions of ourselves. In terms of healing, this is something that at the moment is really, a hot topic about mindfulness and all this. And I think deep healing takes a conscious effort. And if not anything else, if listeners from these two lovely sisters can learn one thing, is that healing is what will give you that peace ultimately.
And what about you, Anila, in terms of your own personal experience? You're a mother of 5, mashallah. So tell me, how has been the change from being a student or a child, moving on through all those stages? Where's it been your challenge?
My story is completely different to Shameen and Zainab. So I did do the traditional route, 16 college, 18 university, did my LPC course straight away, got my training contract straight away, became a solicitor straight away, and then got married. And so I've done the traditional route. Now, with me, I found that unfortunately on the way I had a health issue, and I think that knocked me quite badly, to be fair. And I think what's happened is over the time, excuse the noise, I think it's outside. I think over the time, that's something that has forced me to go on my healing journey as well, just like Sister Zainab was saying, that unless we heal ourselves, it's very difficult to move on. And that's why I do honestly think that healing is consciously sitting with who you are and your relationship with your Allah.
I think it's really important that, sometimes we get caught up in what people did in the past and how they did it and the expectations that we have of other people that make it difficult for us. So I hope, inshallah ta'ala, as we're getting close to the end of our show, inshallah, that we've been able to send out a message that, change is inevitable. And actually, if we use our inner strength, we can be strong within ourselves, and we can set out a good example to the wider audience, our families and our extended people that we're in contact with. Because as Muslims, we are that khalif that Allah has given us. We are that steward, that representation. So strength comes from within, but it also needs to be positive, and that example is from our Allah and from His Rasul and from the Quran. And I hope, inshallah ta'ala, Anila, if you'd like to just sum up before we leave.
Jazakallah khair. I just first would like to thank the sisters. Thank you so much for coming. Really inspiring, mashallah. Next week we're going to continue with managing change. And Naila, anything for the boys next week?
It's all about the boys next week, so stay tuned.
Jazakallah.